I believe that the more that you can leave unsaid and let the audience decide those things for themselves, the more the audience enjoys it.
Hi, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you'll hear interviews with innovative creative artists, entrepreneurs, business executives, and thought leaders. You'll have a front row seat as they explore their internal, uncharted waters about what inspires them to grow, achieve, and innovate. Get their insights and realizations as I tease out answers to questions they've never pondered before. This episode is brought to you by Flags, the new play by Thomas Mullen. You can see the play's premiere at the Broadway-bound Theater Festival August 15th through the 18th. Learn more about Flags at www.flagstheplay.com. Hey there, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I am so excited to introduce you to this week's guest, Thomas Mullen. Tom made the bold decision to become a playwright at the age of 59, which is catnip to me because I love creativity at any age. With a background in journalism and a master's degree in writing for performance from the University of Cambridge, he brings a ton of experience and a fresh perspective to the world of theater. His journey from being featured in the Smithsonian Postal Museum archives to performing with the legendary Footlights, it's filled with insights on creativity, catnip to me, resilience, and the amazing power of storytelling. So if you're looking to be motivated by a story of reinvention and to gain a ton of practical advice on how to pursue your own creative dreams, this episode is for you. Let me welcome Tom Mullen. Tom, thank you for being here.
Isolde, thank you so much for having me. It's
Oh,
a pleasure to be on your show.
oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to have you here because this notion of reinvention, especially as we are sort of mid-career or late career, a reinvention into a more creative way of living your life is, as I said in the introduction for you, it's catnip to me. I'm fascinated by it. I do it myself as often as possible. I would love if you would talk a little bit about embarking on this career change at 59. What inspired you to make such a big life change at that stage? And frankly, how did you come up with the courage and the mindset to make that change?
Wow. I'm not really sure how much courage has to do with it, but thank you. I was 59 years old, and I have three adult sons who all grew up in the newspaper business. My wife and I own small town newspapers throughout the Northwest, and they all kind of went their own directions, sometimes with me. And it really became evident that I needed to get out of the way.
Mm.
In fact, my oldest son wanted to, he was ready to come to blows with me.
Oh
And
my.
it's really just me telling my boys what to do
Mm.
for 30 some years. They all kind of reached the tipping point at the same time. And at the time, fortunately, I had a professional coach, and I really didn't know what I was going to do, but because I was working as the editor of the smallest newspaper that we'd ever owned, and I had really felt like I'd come into my own, that I was doing my best work that I'd ever done. Um, and I did that really. I know that you focus on collaboration, and that's uh, I'd be lost without it. And even in the newspaper business, I felt the
Sure.
same way.
Hmm.
Um, but I went home, I think that very evening, and I was going through old papers, and I found an obituary that I'd written on myself as a traditional student at Marquette at journalism school. And it said that left, I, I'd written that I had left journalism when I was 35 to become a playwright. And I have been a theater geek my entire life, but I'd completely forgotten about that dream. And I thought, I'm almost 60. If I'm going to do this, I need to do it now.
Hmm.
And so I asked my professional coach, how do I do this? And his answer was simply, well, what are the most productive uh, hours of your day? And I want to circle back to this part, but back in those days, I drank a lot, and
Mm.
so my most productive hours were like from 10 to noon.
Hmm.
Um, and he said, just devote an hour or two of that time to doing this. And so I set about devoting that time almost every day of the week, and it was an incredible piece of advice. And I've given it many times to people. It's only been 4 or 5 years, uh, but it just, to allocate your most productive time to the thing that you want the most makes sense. It's logical, but for whatever reason, I had never really thought to do that. So I started by writing a play with my best friend from childhood, and we're still best friends. And we used to write together when we were young. And my obituary said that, he was my writing partner. So he said that he'd do it. He had just retired from a career as a social security investigator.
Hmm.
And so he had some free time. And my wife and I moved to my hometown of Sioux City, Iowa for 6 weeks. And we wrote our first play together. And uh, I just started writing plays and I started taking online courses. I had decided that I was going to move to New York City. I rented a place in the Village and I just thought I'll just dive in, see what happens. And I was planning on moving there April 15th of 2020, but
Mm.
a little thing called COVID happened.
Oh, yeah.
So my oldest son, who had challenged me to fisticuffs, um, a year had gone by, and he turned me on to um, a company called edX. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that,
Mm-mm.
but they offer online courses from world famous universities for free, and it was a reaction to COVID. And so I took a course by Stephen Greenblatt, who I had read one of his books on the ghost of Hamlet, and it was fantastic.
Mm.
Then I thought, well, I want to try Cambridge because I'm a big Monty Python fan. And while I was taking that course, which was a 6 month cycle of online courses, two of the professors asked me to enroll in or apply to the master's program there, which of course I thought, well, I'll never get accepted, so that's no big deal. But they did accept me, and so my wife and I moved to Cambridge for a while. A large part of the first year of studies, and the second year of studies was done mostly here in the U.S. By myself. Well, I shouldn't say by myself because, again, I was collaborating, 2 or 3 times a week during the process of writing my final project. But I do when I said I wanted to circle back, um, I I couldn't help but recognize through many years of my life that I felt as though there was something I was supposed to be doing that I wasn't doing.
Mm.
And I think that that's why in the, after 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd start drinking. And when I embarked upon my playwriting career, that went away. And one of the things that happened is I could be productive at 8 in the morning, because I wasn't going to bed drunk. So I still do drink, but not nearly as much.
Wow. You fascinate me. You really do. First of all, I'm so impressed with uh sort of your self-awareness when you're talking about, for example, the drinking and you say, I still do drink, but I recognize the cause and effect of the fact that if I was going to bed drunk and I'd wake up hungover and then I wasn't productive, it was because I wasn't living the life that I truly wanted to live. And hearing you say that, or the paraphrase of that, I would say, it's first of all, it's inspiring, but second of all, it makes me go, okay, so something happened when you started writing these plays and decided to trust yourself enough to pursue it. And, the very first thing you said is, well, I don't know about courage. Oh, yeah. I think that I would love for you to credit yourself with that because in my mind, it does take a fair amount of courage to realize that you have to tell yourself the truth. right? You can only run away from things for so long. So you made these sweeping changes, and your wife, bless her heart, went, okay, I guess we're moving to England for a while. And so the mindset of that, of realizing I have this awareness, I need to pursue this, and whatever my life changes are going to be, I'm going to have to try this. It did something. It did something to you, and you affected the whole rest of your life. Certainly your wife's life also, to make that. So what drew you to that? And how did these changes of environment shape your writing?
That's a good question. It's difficult to explain how I was drawn to it. I feel like I was pushed to it,
Mm,
and quite often I feel like I don't recognize, the things that I should be recognizing that they're more thrust upon me,
mm.
if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
I will say that the time that I spent in Cambridge was intoxicating for me.
Mm,
I when I would get the reading list on what we would call a syllabus in America, um, and I had like, let's say, 3 months. I looked at the reading list, and it would be, and I'm a pretty big reader. I would say there's more here than I would read in 5 years. And so I had the feeling of like somebody just turned a fire hose on and pointed it
mm,
at me. And that
mm-hmm,
fire hose was information. And I was, 60 some years old at the time. Um, and then as we would get closer to classes beginning, it was like they would throw more at you. And then
mm-hmm,
they would throw work at you, writing assignments. And then as you'd get to 3 days from the beginning of a series of classes, they'd throw even more at you. And there were only 15, I think, students in my class, but we were, I think, welded together by this experience. We lived and worked together. We were doing like 13-hour days,
mm-hmm,
and then we would go away, to work in theater for like 6 weeks, and then we'd get back together, and we'd live and work together for another week. And so during my time at Cambridge, I was involved in producing musicals, writing lyrics for a musical, and seeing the beautiful thing about a university like Cambridge is that all you have to do is write the work, and then the university will make that be on stage. They become the stage crafters. I can remember attending Zoom early on, and all the students were like, "Well, where do we get the money?" And the university people would say, "Don't worry about the money. You have to worry about writing the work, and then we will help you take care of the rest." And there
mm,
are stages all over Cambridge, and there's thousands of students who want to act, and that want to be directors, that want to be technicians. And so it was a glorious experience. And that word just seems to keep popping up. It was all about collaboration. And I mean, from not just from the point of staging a play, but from the point of creating that play. And in fact, one of the modules we did at Cambridge was on collaboration. It was one of the first things they did was they would pair us up with other writers, and then that would be a continual happening, through the 2 years of the work. In fact, it's still happening. Like my favorite, I call her my bestie from Cambridge, is a 26-year-old woman. She's of Portuguese and Zambian descent. And I got to tell you, a 63-year-old white dude writing with a 26-year-old woman from, Africa and Europe creates an incredible mixture of, I guess, interests and talents. And we just had our first screenplay selected um, by it's called Page International. Like I think we're in the top 10%. I'm not really sure what that means, if anything, but I think it's starting to get some traction. And honestly, I never wanted to write a screenplay. I had read this story in the paper when I was in Cambridge about the man that created motion pictures, and his
Hmm.
name is Louis Le Prince. He's a Frenchman. He married a woman from Britain, and then he came to America and began working on a machine for motion pictures. In fact, he was working on a machine. He was working on a camera projector to create three-dimensional films, and this is in the 1880s. And
Wow.
he won a patent for it, an international patent, and then he disappeared. His wife believes that he was killed by Albert Einstein, and there really hasn't been a screenplay about his story, and it just the idea that I was learning about this in a British newspaper, it kind of blew me away, and so I started taking it to probably half of the students in my class were screenwriters, budding screenwriters. And they all just kind of said, yeah, that's a great idea. But I could tell they weren't really interested in it. And I
Hmm.
took it to Maria and she said, yeah, I'll write that, but only if you help me. And that's how that happened. And right now we're just finishing up a treatment for a episodic comedy series, which again, I know I'm digressing here, but she wanted to do a comedy series based on or in the image of Ricky Gervais' Afterlife. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, and I do love Ricky Gervais, but I wasn't a big fan of Afterlife, and so I was just trying to deconstruct what it was about that that made it so great. And I think it's because he went to it's a story about a man who loses his wife to cancer, and so he's plumbing the depths of human existence and bringing comedy from that place, which I love that idea. And I spend my winters in New Orleans now, and my summers in Washington State, and I can tell you what they do share in common, and it's not a lot, is the crisis of the unhoused or the underhoused or homelessness. And so and one of the things that I think should be obvious to all of us is when you're driving around Brooklyn or walking around, is that as obvious as this crisis is, we don't look at it. I mean, for the most part, we ignore it. So believe it or not, and I'm old enough to have loved James L. Brooks's Taxi. He's one of my heroes. I wanted to create a episodic comedy, kind of in the maybe just to pay homage to Taxi and that kind of three camera, one location. And so we've written the first episode and just about finished up the treatment for an episodic comedy called Low Barrier, and it takes place in a low barrier homeless shelter in New Orleans. And but that's the project that I'm working on right now. Although I do have a play. My final project is featured in a festival in New Canaan, Connecticut, the middle of August.
Well, there's so many things I want to talk about right now. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, first of all, Alex Rieger is one of my favorite characters in any show or play or movie ever. I'm a huge Taxi fan, and Judd Hirsch is incredible in the role. He deserved all the Emmys. So Taxi was one of those shows to me where we got to glimpse lives that were in process in a way that is reminiscent of MASH to me,
Yes.
that same kind of feeling. And so I'm very excited to to eventually watch your show when it comes out. Although your show sounds like it's going to have some darker elements than perhaps Taxi, but maybe on the same level as MASH. So very interested to see that when it comes out. And I have a ton of things I want to say about all of the things that you were talking about, but I'm very curious since I live relatively close to New Canaan, Connecticut. Talk to me about the play and talk to me about the festival because Having a play produced, it's kind of like I write books, for example, and holding my book in my hot little hands. The very first time I ever held one of my books in my hot little hands was like nothing I'd ever experienced, except for when I directed my first play in college. It was the same kind of incredibly euphoric, invigorating feeling of seeing my vision in reality. Can you talk to me a little bit about your perspective, your frame of mind of watching the process and being part of the process of seeing your play come to life in this festival?
Okay, so again, another great question. The wonderful thing about this particular process is that I have been through several variations of having a play produced.
Hmm.
Um, Back when, way back when, a friend of mine in Wyoming, we created a community theater together, and we were kind of the heart and soul. We directed, produced, all of that stuff. But certainly we had no idea what we were doing. We were just trying to do what we thought was the way you would do those kind of things. And then there was the second piece. I shouldn't say the second piece I wrote, but one of the early pieces I wrote a few years ago was a musical for this little town in Montana that we were living in. And I wrote it with my best friend in that town, who was the retired sheriff, kind of an Andy Griffith type of character. And anyway, it was just silly. But when I was struggling to write the music for it, or I should say, we were struggling to find the music for it, we had somebody come in who had written music and had directed musicals and volunteered to do it. And I just walked away from the project. I thought, what a relief. Um, and that was a mistake because I had the feeling when I saw the premiere, I had the feeling that I dropped my baby out the window and nobody caught it. It
Mm,
was just one of those situations where had I been, and the fault was entirely mine. Had I been there even for one rehearsal, I could have provided notes to the director
hmm.
because people just weren't understanding what they were saying.
Hmm.
But my writing partner Steve, who was in the play, I gave him the notes, and by the end of the run, I think it ran for like 6 weeks. It All indications were that it was a pretty good show.
Hmm.
Um, Conversely, when you're in an environment like Cambridge, which I would say very nurturing, um, everybody is there supporting. I shouldn't say everyone else because you do see some big fights. And in the theater world, it's not the drama is not just
On the
out,
stage. Yeah, there's no drama people like drama people. I understand.
but when I first was notified that my play was a finalist for this festival, I it didn't say what the play was. And of course, I'd written a number of plays, and I had I just started, I guess you call it spray and pray, when you're just trying to, you know, tailor anything that you've written for any festival or anything you can in America. So it's a lot different over here than it is across the pond, getting things produced. Um, So I didn't even know what play I had submitted to this.
Hmm.
And when we had that, I think, an interview with Rick and Lenore, who are the organizers of this, it became obvious right away that this was my play Flags, which is um, something that I would trace back to like age 11. Um, I went to Catholic schools most of my life, and so the nuns and the priests were my teachers. And I can remember, I think it was Sister Concelia um, announcing to the class that my cousin, Tom Mullen, same name, it's actually a second cousin, he's my dad's cousin, had just returned from Vietnam with a Purple Heart. So we all know what that means. And this was right after we had said our morning prayer, which is right after you come back from mass, but every school day in those days. started with going to church and the Pledge of Allegiance. And somehow in my mind, those things became all connected at that time. The Pledge of Allegiance, which is flags, and people getting, shot in war, and prayer. Um, and I, when I applied to Cambridge, I knew that my final project was going to be flags, but I had no conceptualization of how I would write a play, you know, based on that idea. Um, and I was probably about halfway through the first year before I started to have some conceptualization of how this might happen, what the characters might be. And I think at one point I was reminded of a book called Flags of Our Fathers, which Clint Eastwood made into a movie. Um, and when I was reading that book in the 90s, that was, I think, the first time that I realized that the flag raising at Iwo Jima was staged. And they had sent platoon after platoon up the hill. They'd sent scores of photographers. So the whole, this iconic image that you can visualize in your mind right now of the men raising the flag at Iwo Jima, it was planned, and the reason it was planned was we were almost broke as a nation, and we needed to sell war bonds. The sale of war bonds was starting to wane because Hitler was on the ropes, and the problem being that most of the aid for, I shouldn't say the aid for America because America was aiding, the Allied powers too, but most of the fighting in the Pacific Theater was being done by the United States. And so here we are broke. Iwo Jima, I think, is really kind of where the war started to turn in favor of the United States, but also the people in the boots, the Marines at Iwo Jima, they could see what was going on. They knew what was happening. And I think when Eastwood made the movie version, which I think he stayed fairly true to the book, he showed that the problem most of those men were having with this idea of what is heroism and what are we doing. And so I thought, well, I'll put four Marines. The first scene I wrote, I put four Marines on a transport ship from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, uh, which the Battle of Okinawa was, horrific, much as Iwo Jima was. But during this 10-minute scene that I originally wrote as part of a screenplay, but just because that was the assignment, these men, one of the men or two of the men are starting to question, what is it that they're doing? And I decided just to kind of give some kind of form to those four men, that I would model them after four archangels: Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, and Uriel. And by the time that it became a play, only one of them was an angel, and that would be Gabriel. And actually, when I finished the project, I wasn't really sure if Gabriel was a madman or actually an angel. And I thought that was okay. But because, in the play Doubt, I think that that was written in such a way that whoever plays the priest decides whether or not that priest is guilty. Because I've seen performances of Doubt where I was absolutely sure that the priest was innocent. And then the first time I saw it was Philip Seymour Hoffman. And
Mm.
having grown up in the Catholic Church, I don't know if Philip Seymour Hoffman was Catholic, but to me, Philip Seymour Hoffman was guilty. That the character that he played in that. So I believe that the more that you can leave unsaid and let the audience decide those things for themselves, the more the audience enjoys it. And so that's what I wanted to happen. But I think practicality got a hold of me in the end. And during my rewrites for this festival, um, I think I've made it pretty obvious that he's not a madman. Um, but the main female character, I do believe she continues to believe that he's a madman through the entire play.
I'm fascinated. Yeah, it's interesting to me in listening to you talk about Gabriel and what I understand. I was not raised Catholic. He is sort of a messenger of God. He announces God's will to the humans, I guess. And so I'm fascinated to see how that translates into this character and how that applies with the character and that character's relationships to everybody else. It is also interesting to me to go back to what you were saying just a minute ago about you felt like you threw your baby out with the bathwater for that one play. And I'm interested in this because these are things we often do. Either we're terrified of killing our darlings or we sort of step away because something makes us need to have distance. And I remember I'm a member of I write plays also, and I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild. And I remember being told they can't keep you out of rehearsals. If you are the playwright, they can't say, no, 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 this is a closed rehearsal. They are required by law. If you're a member of the guild, if you've written the play, you can't be kept out. So I guess I'm wondering when you're in your process, when you're writing, when you're done, and some people say writing a play, you're never done. You can come back to a play you wrote 20 years ago and still tweak it. But when you're in that process, what is your what is your predilection? Do you want to kill darlings? Are you ready to tighten it up and tighten it up and tighten it up? Or do you just step away and go, okay, that's it? I have to be finished with this so I can move on to the next thing.
Okay, so I don't think I want to kill my darlings. I have sometimes wondered if I was a sociopath, but I don't think I am. But when I was planning on moving to New York City, the kickoff for that was I was going to be taking a Robert McKee's 3 day seminar, which of
Hmm.
course was canceled because of COVID.
Sure.
However, eventually, I mean, they gave me credit for it, and I had a chance to see it in London. Eventually, I circled back and I saw him in New York City a year ago, Halloween. And Robert McKee to me is a brilliant screenwriting guru. I've read the book twice, not because I wanted to, but because it is such a heavy read. It's such a thick read that I needed to read it more than once to still try to get a glimpse of the understanding. And his lectures are pretty much that book. Well, he's written several books, but Story, I think, is the
Hmm.
seminal book that he's written. Um, but like on the toward the last day, and I mean, I was just this was um, when I was really in the throes of working on this final project. This is my final year at Cambridge, and I'm pretty much a if you can see what's in the headlights and you can trust that you're going to make it to your destination. Um, also, I can't remember. I think it was Mammoth that said you can't know the ending of your piece because if you know the ending, the audience will know the ending, and that's not a good thing. Um, so I think I was like in the last day of McGee, and he just like flat out tells everybody in the audience, if you think that you don't need to know the ending, that you don't need to write an outline, that you don't need to do all your research, you are fooling yourself because it just doesn't work that way. And the problem being is that you won't want to kill your darlings, that you
Mm.
will become in love with your voice. And I never really felt like I had that resistance to kill my darlings. I mean, I've been an editor and a reporter, and I've certainly many times a week I'd look at my copy and don't need this, don't need this, don't need this. No matter how good it was, it's just, you're trying to serve whatever it is you're writing. However, hearing that from Bob McKee, who's like this guru for me, it kind of might have been the only time in my life that I remember having writer's block. And it just became I became afraid because, I was probably about a fourth of the way into my time for writing my final project, and here somebody put up this brick wall in front of me. And one of my best friend who I'd written with many times turned me on to Malcolm. Oh, what's his name? Great
Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell's interview with Paul Simon.
Hmm.
And I'm not a big Malcolm Gladwell fan. And I told him that. And he's like, yeah, but it's Paul Simon. And so he said, get the audiobook. And I listened to the audiobook. And I don't want to sit here and I guess I do want to sit here and compare myself to Paul Simon, um, because Paul Simon's process, as Paul Simon tells it to Malcolm Gladwell, is the
Hmm.
same process that I have. And it's just a matter of, trying different things and then recognizing what works and what doesn't work. And then, not beating yourself up over those things that don't work, but just, say, okay, well, this didn't work. And now I'll try this. And hopefully you remember, that one thing didn't work. And I was also shocked when we did our first table read of Flags that it ran like 115 minutes and it needed to be 90 without
Mm.
intermissions. And I'd written a, traditional 3-act play. So I had to go back there and start stripping it down. And the table read was done by the 7 playwrights that are in this festival. And then, of
Hmm.
course, you get notes from the playwrights and Lenore. And the strange, well, I would say that sometime during that first year, like when I went into Cambridge, and when I had conceived of this play, and I mean, for years I thought about writing a play like this. I think my idea was that I wanted to write um, something like The Crucible, something that was going to really affect change in the culture,
Mm.
and really make a mark. And sometime during that first year at Cambridge, I decided, what I want to do is entertain people. Um, that and again, I know David Mamet's not like the most culturally acceptable person these days, but he was a big influence on my writing, as Sorkin. And this play, actually, I know I'm digressing here, but this play actually is like a tribute mostly to Tony Kushner's Angels in America.
Mm.
And then I would say Monty Python's Life of Brian, which is about blindly following a person or a belief system without questioning it. And then there's a great playwright in Britain that most people in the U.S. are unfamiliar with, named Jez Butterworth. And his plays are just some of the most beautiful things I've ever read. Um, oh, geez, I forgot where I was
You were
because I
talking.
digressed.
No, no, no. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. You were talking about the play being an homage to Kushner and a
Oh,
couple of the other people.
yeah, I think I was digressing because I brought up Mamet again, and I wanted to I guess specify the what were the 3 main influences of this play, and if there is a fourth, it would be Stephen Greenblatt's The Great Swerve, which introduced me to Lucretius. I wasn't really familiar with Lucretius, and to
Hmm.
me, Lucretius, a student of Epicurus. This is the beginning of what I would call humanism, which eventually evolved, I think, into existentialism. And I'm also a big fan of the Coen brothers, which to me is absurdism, Albert Camus. And so to me, this is the most beautiful comedy there
Mm.
is. And to circle back to Mamet, he says that when people pluck down their nickel, they don't want to be taught a lesson; they want to be entertained.
Mm.
And so the driving force behind my writing was always, how do I push the audience to the edge of their seat? how do I excite their senses? All of them. I mean, I would do rewrites where, I was just focusing on exciting one sense. Um, but I guess that's my writing process.
I love that you were. I said something in an I was being interviewed the other day, and I said something like, it's okay to stand on the shoulders of giants as long as you thank the giants, right? I'm listening to you name all of these heavy hitters when it comes to writing movies and plays, and saying, these are my inspirations, which I love. And I don't know about whatever controversy David Mamet is involved in. I do know that House of Games was a movie that affected me deeply. That one sentence of when you do something unforgivable, forgive yourself is something that is revolutionary to me because I tend to be one of those people who I'm sure it's my fault. I'm sure it's my fault. So it was revolutionary to hear it. And in many ways, he that one phrase, that one sentence changed my life for the positive. But when I look at the sort of the influences you're talking about, as I said, they're heavy hitters. You're not going, I'm going to write a musical about the way flowers bloom. You're really writing about some weighty subjects. And so I guess the question that I have for you on this is, when you do this, obviously Flags has been accepted into this festival. Uh you're writing to I guess how do I put this? It's almost like a mindset thing. Are you writing to produce the play? Are you writing to have written the play? Are you writing to see your vision on stage? What is your sort of end goal for your work?
Well, oof, yes, really good questions.
That's part of my charm.
Oh, okay. So I would say one of the blessings of my life is that my time as the editor of the Phillipsburg Mail, the last newspaper that I dove in and was the editor, I had just reached a point in my life where I think I trusted myself enough to stop as an editor. I think one of the great traps is that you have a Bible someplace, like a AP style book or perhaps your own newspaper style book. And eventually, all of the voices in the newspaper you're editing become some version of
Mm,
that.
hmm
But what happened when I was like 56 or 57, and I'd been doing the job for 30 years, I let all that go. I met another editor, a paper that I bought with one of my kids in Sisters, Oregon, and he kind of did it the opposite of the way I'd done it.
hmm,
He basically culled all of the local talent and most of the paper or most of the stories in the Nugget News, the newspaper of Sisters, Oregon, are the voices of all of these different people. And I think what had happened was, I had this idea of, from the time I was in my early 30s till my mid 50s, that there's a right way and a wrong way of putting out a newspaper. And a big slap to the head was when my wife Annie took the reins of that newspaper as owner and publisher, and she did everything. I wouldn't say 180 degrees from the way I would do it, but like 90 degrees. And I just needed to keep my mouth shut and watch what happened. And this
hmm
was in 2008 during the, right when the Great Recession hit.
hmm
And what happened was she grew that newspaper by like 30% a year. And it was so I would say she was a great inspiration for me for that, time 10 years later, as was Jim Cornelius. And that was just to trust other people and not try to to let them find their own voices rather
mm,
than to try to file their voice the way you want them to. And so I think at that time, rather than to try to have reporters and that sort of thing, I just started reaching out to people, to great photographers in this little town in Montana, this little mountain town, great writers, and I would just solicit them, every week. Hey, have you got anything for me next week? And then thereby the paper became the voice of the community rather
Mm,
than whatever my idea of what the proper voice for a news organization would be. But I think more than anything else, I had enough confidence in my history and my own writing abilities to trust that I needed to write for myself. Whatever I was doing, however I built the paper, however it was coming together, I was doing it to please me.
mm,
And and I think that kind of aligns with humanism. Um, and really the play then, although it is about I think the symbolic power that flags have over people. And I would say very much a love-hate relationship in my life with flags.
mm.
I don't mean the play, I mean flags in general.
I figured.
But I think Gabriel represents, I would say, theism and the power that has over people.
Hmm.
And Raphael, another one of the main characters, represents humanism.
Hmm.
And I don't really expect people to choose one or over the other. One's a good guy, one's a bad guy, that kind of thing. But that's really the soul of the conflict of the play is humanism uh, versus theism. And as a old back in my early days as an editor, I used to counsel young reporters. I would ask them, "What? Tell me your favorite book," and they whatever the book was, and I'd say, "Okay, take the conflict out of that book," and and then you have pretty much nothing, because the soul of, and this is the trap that we found ourselves in now, especially with social media, but the soul of journalism, the soul of, I think, of writing is conflict. I can remember the first online course I took was Aaron Sorkin's The Master's Class series.
Mm,
And this was the first time a light bulb came on for me, where I had read Aristotle several times, and as you would imagine, it's all Greek to me. But but he talked it all about intention and obstacle. You put an obstacle in front of the hero. He has this intention that there's something he's got to do, and it's got to happen within a really short amount of time.
hmm.
And you just keep throwing obstacles in front of the hero,
Hmm.
and the hero either overcomes those obstacles or um, doesn't overcome the obstacle. Maybe the hero dies. And he said, if you don't have intention and obstacle, you have journalism. And I don't know if Sorkin was ever a journalist, but I mean that really made sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at The West Wing, you're certainly going to see a lot of that kind of writing. So there you go. Yeah, it's fascinating to me though. I'm listening to it and I'm going, okay, so what it brought to mind was Joseph Campbell and looking at the hero's journey in general. And so you have this conflict that you've set up between two characters in your play. Which one of them in your mind is the hero?
Well, because of the notion of a character's arc, I would say Gabriel certainly is the anti-hero
Mm,
especially in the beginning,
hmm.
because he just wants to. Well, okay, but again, I'm going to go back to Tony Kushner. So, I have not seen Angels in America on stage, but I
Hmm.
have seen the HBO series, which
Mm,
is incredible. Um,
absolutely.
but if you pick up a copy of the script and read the script, it it's even better than that miniseries. And Kushner does some things in his play that, to me, I couldn't even imagine how you could think of those things. And so the uh, the part of the angel, the main angel, is played by Emma, uh, great British actress. See, this is why I needed to to
Emma
get
Thompson.
Emma Thompson to get busy on this because my mind's going.
You
Um,
just have a lot in your mind. I think that's the deal. I do these little data dumps where consciously go, I'm going to
oh,
forget these 2 years are just gone. And if I ever need them, I have literally a librarian that I've imagined in my head named Edna, who I can ask to come back with information. I will ask her for information. She'll head back into my subconscious, and then she'll bring it back. I don't try to remember everything anymore. It is a lost cause. So please continue. Emma
yeah.
Thompson.
Okay. So anyway, so Emma Thompson, she shows up, I believe it, over 2 hours into the play,
Mm,
the angel.
hmm
And it's just foreshadowing. And there are a lot of notions that, well, for instance, like if you look at Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Big Daddy shows up at the very end of the first act, and the notion being is that you want to hold in reserve the character that the play demands
mm,
until the audience demands it. Okay. And but conversely, if I'm writing what I would call a joy ride or a thrill ride, I need to get them like right at the beginning. So one of the early struggles for me was, when do I introduce Gabriel?
hmm
And in my play, and much like, and this is, I think, more of a tribute to Jez Butterworth, who he's written some incredible plays. But he brings you like right out. He will bring you to tears in the first page.
hmm
Now, I don't know that I'm bringing anybody to tears, but hopefully laughter. And so Gabriel, as you mentioned, is a messenger, and the message that he wants to bring to America, and at its darkest hour, is that America represents, in God's eyes, the last great hope for humanity. And so he goes to Michael, who is Raphael's brother, who's sleeping, and tries to shock and awe him into, "You need to take my message." That's how the show opens.
mm
Michael won't even wake up. The next scene, he goes to Raphael, Michael's brother, and he tries to do the same thing. Raphael believes that he's having a hallucination because he ate some bad clams. And then
Oh my.
he's at the so Gabriel goes out into the street. He's at the end of his rope, and then he wanders into the Stockyards Cafe in Sioux City, Iowa, my hometown, and um, he's just given up because he can't find anybody to take this message. And the woman that runs the Stockyards Cafe says, "Well, why don't you take it yourself?" And that kind of becomes the catalyst for the entire show. And then the first act, now again, there aren't any intermissions in this iteration of the show, but the first act is, and Skip Ploss, my director, he's directed like 50 plays, and the reason that I wanted Skip to direct it, and thank God he agreed, is because there's this sounds trite, but he gets it. It just he understood the play.
hmm
And Rick had one of the organizers, Rick Sayers, had given me 5 different directors by the time I asked Skip to do it, and incredibly talented directors, all of them. One of them didn't get it and told me that and really didn't want to be involved. Great. um, but I really, here we are an hour into this thing, and I haven't even talked about Skip and Lorraine and the Broadway Bound Festival. I think they're both journalists, Skip and Lorraine. I'm not sorry, Skip, Rick and anyway, they decided that they wanted to create what I would call a boot camp for playwrights.
hmm
Now, this was unbeknownst to me when I submitted my play to the festival. But it became evident immediately that they want to basically show playwrights how to get their work staged, and hence the name Broadway Bound. I believe that they'd been doing it in the city since like 2016, and either this year or last year was the first year they moved north to New Canaan. And um, I think the idea is that since August is a dark month for Broadway, so many um, the new seasons being staged, so this would give a place for theater heads to go see some new work. Meanwhile, they select 7 playwrights, and then I was told early on I don't even have to go to Connecticut. I can do this all, much like they would tell me in Cambridge. My job is to write.
Mm.
And as a playwright, anybody that's doing any kind of creative writing, it's all about rewriting. And I think, as you said before, some people say they're never done. I had to strip my 90 page, which I thought would be 90 minutes, down to about 66 pages of
Wow.
script.
Hmm.
And the problem that I don't even know if this is a problem or not. This is a problem for Skip. Uh, is that I had 18 scenes in my 115-minute play, and that's a lot of scenes. But also because of my nature, I think I'm 63. I think I'm in that first generation of OCD, and probably because of television, the
Mm.
television I watched as a child. But I love theater, but I have found myself getting a little drowsy and thinking, God, I wish they would have a scene change.
Mm.
And so I think that's part of what I would call the thrill ride. And the play is constructed so that it can be done very minimalist, with almost no scene changes at all. And so when I got my notes, I would have one playwright would say, "Well, this is your weakest scene, and you could probably just cut that." And then another playwright would say of that same scene, "Whatever you do, that scene is perfect. Don't change anything." And
Ah,
s- and so
lots of
during
cooks.
yeah, so during my what I did is I didn't cut any. I mean, I had cut scenes before. I had killed darlings, that kind of thing, in my earlier process. But in my final process for this festival, I just basically stripped down the dialogue to
Mm.
anything that wasn't essentially um, serving the play itself.
Hmm.
And thereby it's just I think it's going to go really fast for the audience, and I don't imagine it's going to be 90 minutes either. I think it'll be under that, and hopefully it's just as I say, a thrill ride. That's really what I set about doing.
I'm fascinated by all of this, especially since one of the things for me as a playwright has been that struggle with I'm writing out these stage directions, and are they going to take longer to actually do, or are they going to take longer to read in a play reading, right? So these are the things, these are the sort of the technical bits that you end up having to become proficient in order to be able to write whatever play if you're writing it to spec in any way. But I want to ask you, Tom, this is, you and I are not spring chickens. I'm a few years younger than you are, but not many. And we've decided to embark on this major milestone type of career shift. I want to ask you, what does I've made it look like for you?
Okay, so I have to go back to when I was probably 38, 39 years old. I was serving on the board of directors of the National Newspaper Association, which is organization of weekly newspapers for the most
Hmm.
part.
Hmm.
And we were sitting at around it. We would go every March to DC, and that would be like when we would um, meet with our U.S. senators and
Hmm.
congresspeople and talk to them about what we thought were, yeah, lobbying is the dirty word that I don't want to use here. But I was sitting at a table of other newspaper people, and somebody went around the table and said, if you could do whatever it is in the world that you wanted to do, what would it be? And I was probably the fifth or sixth person to answer, and I was just shocked. One of them wanted to be a rock star, and they got to me, and I'm like, I'm doing it. And I think that goes back when you ask, what does I've made it? And for that matter, I would say this about my last gig as editor of the Phillipsburg Mail. I would say this about this play. I've done it, and that does not mean that it's over
Mm-hmm.
by any stretch of the imagination. I was surprised that look, I wanted to take this thing to Edinburgh,
Mm-hmm.
um, and my advisor at Cambridge, he wasn't trying to counsel me out of it, but he made me realize the cost and the time involved,
Mm-hmm.
and that Edinburgh has become what he called as kind of like one person in a microphone. And he said that kind of started about the time of Fleabag, where it just kind of turned into almost like a stand-up festival. That's
Huh.
not to say that there aren't still great pieces being performed there, but
Mm-hmm.
I had written an epic with I think 13 characters, which actually I constructed it so that it could be played by four actors. But we're doing it, I don't know, with nine or 10 or 11. We haven't really doubled up many of the parts for this piece. But the more people you have, the more rent you got to pay. The more people that you're asking to give up their time, or try to find some kind of compensation for all those people acting, technical crews.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that because of my connections in Cambridge and its proximity to London, a lot of the Cambridge students, when they start producing plays, London is where they're going. And Lenore, one of the organizers of Broadway Bound, told me, if I were you, if you get traction, you should take this thing to London, which is kind of what I had decided I was going to do prior to getting selected for this festival.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you say, I would say I've done it, that's success. I feel like I wrote the play that I wanted to, and then I pared it down. I thought impossibly for this festival, and my plan would be after this festival. I mean, if I do get some traction, if audiences like it, I'm gonna take it to London and have my bestie Maria Messias Mendez direct it. She's directed my plays before. I absolutely love her. Um, and stage it in London, which I would hope to do next year. And in the meantime, I'm writing screenplay, which I never wanted to do. I'm writing screenplays. I'm writing episodic comedy. When I was young, my dream would have been to be in a writer's room, like on The Odd Couple, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of. But that never happened for me. And if somehow Low Barrier, this episodic comedy about the homeless shelter, got picked up, and I had a chance to work in a writer's room, I would be a pig in slop, and I would think that Annie would probably go along with me and help me along the way. But uh, the the time that I spent in Cambridge as a 60-year-old man, surrounded by mostly people, my professors, of which would be four, five, six, seven a day sometimes. The way that process was, I don't think any of them were as old as I am. And generally speaking, in England anyway, well-known playwrights and television writers and screenwriters. Um, but the kind of inspiration and the kind of energy, I think I felt like, the old story, as you get older, you begin to understand the idea of is it incubus? Is that, or a vampire, somebody that draws the energy out of younger people. And that's a very real thing. And I don't know if they're less, if their energy is lessened by being around me, but I certainly am fulfilled, by that kind of thing. I don't think I would ever want to be a professor or an instructor. That looks like too much work to me. But I can see the pull.
Yeah, I who have been a professor will say yes, it is. It's a double-edged sword, I think. On the one hand, there's so much inspiration to be had. On the other hand, it can be exhausting. So you have to find a balance there for yourself. And it sounds to me like you are. And I love the notion of Tom Mullen in a writer's room. I used to want to be in a TV writer's room. I would have written for Remington Steele. That would have been my goal in the 80s. And that's because wow, a strong woman character who has the world by the horns, if you will, and is doing what she wants to do and succeeding at it in one way or another. So to me, that was catnip. And so I'm listening to you and I'm going, okay, so there are all of these things happening, and you're in a festival called Broadway Bound. So maybe you'll be bringing it to Broadway after the West End. Who knows? I will be in the front row watching. I would love to ask you if somebody wants to get a ticket to the festival to see Flags, where do they need to go? And also, where can they find out more about all of the work that you're doing?
Okay, so I don't really have any place to. I probably need to put this on the website that I purchased after I was selected for the festival, and it's flagstheplay.com. So www.flagstheplay.com is basically just a brief synopsis of the play and then a button to buy tickets. You hit the button to buy tickets. That's a hyperlink to Rick and Lenore's website for Broadway Bound Festival. And in that website, you will see bios of all the seven playwrights and the synopses of their plays and the dates that they're playing and tickets. So, and by the way, I was involved in table reads for all seven of these plays, and you know, like it's a little bit like my Cambridge experience. The map is everywhere with these plays. We have two-handers, um, like a Harold Pinter type of play between a man and a woman. Um, Geez, I don't want to spoil anything. I've got there's a young writer. I mean, there's just some really good plays. There's a young woman who wrote a play based on um, her sister and her mother and her mother's sisters at the funeral of her grandmother. It's just an incredible play. There's a gentleman from he's a New Yorker, but he has Jamaican roots, and it's magical realism, born of Jamaican stories. And it's just, I mean, there's some really good theater that's going to be produced between, I think it's August 8th and August 30th or 31st.
September
At
1st, just so you know,
Oh,
between
September
August 8th
1st.
and
Yeah.
September 1st. Yeah. And that Broadway Bound Theater Festival, if you want to know the link to that, is broadwayboundfest.com. And I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. If you're listening to this and you want to know more about that, if you're in Connecticut, you should definitely check that out and check out flagstheplay.com as well. Because yeah, I'm actually, while you're talking, I'm going, okay, Family Vacation is the story about grandmother's funeral, and Flags, of course, is next. And there's a number of different, and they look like it's a real variety of shows that have been written. And at the same time, along some interestingly common themes. So I'm very excited to make my way to New Canaan if I can this season and see the shows. I wanna ask you a few questions that I ask everybody who comes on the show. But before I do, Tom, I really want to say how grateful I am that you took the time. I know you're super busy with writing and with staging this play for the festival and all of that, but I'm really grateful that you took the time to be here and chat with me about this, because this process is it can be very lonely for a lot of people, and a lot of people feel like they are out there by themselves, and most of this process is rejections. And in fact, I've embarked on a project that I'm calling the 100 Rejections Project.
Oh,
I aim to get 100 rejections of my plays into festivals between July 8th of 2024 and July 8th of 2025. So that is my thing. I am changing the frame of reference on the word rejection. I'm thinking of it as a positive, not a negative. But it is something that we all as writers, as creatives, have to deal with. So I'm going to ask you, before I ask you these last two questions, how do you handle the no, the rejection?
um, when I was 24 years old, I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, and I thought I was going to write a book. This is before I started writing as a reporter. And I just filled up a waste paper basket every day for about 2 weeks. And then I took the unholy of unholy jobs, a salesman for the Arkansas Democrat. And
Mm.
I was selling subscriptions door to door. And I started reading literature. And there was a sales trainer named Tom Hopkins. and he talked about something he called the power of no. And he said that if you want to double your yeses, all you got to do is double your no's. And I
Mm,
mean, I was like 24 years old when I read that, and it made perfect sense. And when I beat up on myself, which of course we all do as writers, it's generally because I think to myself, oh, I've only got 20 rejections for that. And if you got 20 rejections, you submitted probably 50 things.
mm,
And 20 is not enough, because if you talk to people that have, by any measure of success, really made it, you know, the, generally speaking, 20 is like the starting point. You got to get 20 no's before you're going to get a nibble. And there are exceptions to that rule, but I love what you said there. The idea of getting 100 rejections. But you've got to embrace that, even
yeah.
though, especially as a writer, they're rejecting you, because even though these characters might be fantastical, or you could consider them part of our imagination, they do come from us. And you know, ultimately, when even as a salesperson, uh, whatever you're selling, or marketing, the people either accept or reject the person that is selling or marketing.
Hmm.
And so you really have to create a mindset that this is part of the process.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing because it is a challenge. And so many people take it very personally. And I've sort of had to reframe it for myself because there are times when I get accepted into an anthology or my books get published or whatever. Uh, and that's easy. Of course, it's wonderful and we celebrate. But I think that there's something to be said for celebrating when your work isn't for someone because all it takes is one yes and you can be on your way. So I find that I take heart in that.
Yes,
So, Tom, I have just two more questions and then I will let you go on, get on with your day because I know I could keep, I have like 20 questions that I was going to ask and we got to like five of them. So, so that
that's my
means that no, you're not at fault at all. That just means that I enjoyed listening to what you were saying so much that all my questions flew out the window. But hopefully, maybe you'll come back after the festival again sometime this autumn or in the winter, and we'll talk more because there's so much more to talk about when it comes to creating theater because it's one of our first forms of entertainment, storytelling in general. I remember reading somewhere we used to sit around, back thousands of years ago, we would sit around bonfires and someone would tell us stories about how things came to be and explain what the seasons were and why the stars came out at night. And that's at some point it became performance. So some of the oldest artwork is us making plays. So I'm very excited to keep talking to you about this and learning more from your wisdom. I really appreciate you taking the time. Here are the last two questions. The first of the last, the penultimate question, as they say, is what is it that gets you up in the morning? And I don't mean your alarm.
it's pretty rare that I'm awakened by an alarm. I've got a pretty good biological clock, so I do set my alarm. But generally speaking, I wake up. I went fishing yesterday, and I had to get up at 10 minutes to 3, and so my alarm was set for 2:50. And at a quarter to 3, I woke up and I looked at my phone, and that's how I started yesterday. Um, what gets me up is lust for life, as Iggy Pop said. It's the the most difficult thing for me to do. Actually, that I think I'm okay at, and that's scheduling. I'm a big believer that if I create a schedule, not a list of things to do, um, but a schedule. I will generally adhere to that schedule, and that will make me productive, and that will relieve me of the burden of consciousness. The absurdity of what life is. Um, I can't. I'm going to turn 64 next month. Right? I'm sorry, 2 months, September. I can't imagine retiring. I mean, to me, I can remember I love Ed Asner, and when I was young, he was in I want to say a television movie where an airplane crashed and they're like in the mountains, and he was like an old Russian or something. And I can remember he just kept saying to himself, "To sleep is to die. To sleep is to die," and trying to stay awake to survive. And I translate that into to retire is to die. I
Mm,
mean, I can't, if my work is writing, interviewing people, um, collaborating with other writers, to try to invigorate my work, and hopefully help them too.
hmm
Um, I, I can't imagine not doing that. If I didn't do those things, I would be tortured. I would probably just be drunk all the time because I would be trying to, find a different way to escape the burden of consciousness.
Hmm. See, now that's interesting because to me, what you just said indicates almost super consciousness or hyper consciousness. I don't think of it as an escape at all. I think of it as knowing yourself well enough to know that there are stories you need to tell and then telling those stories. So I don't think of it as escapism at all. I think of it as hyper reality almost. So kudos to you. That's wonderful. All right. Here is the last question. And this is one, it's a silly question, but I find that it can yield some profound answers. And the question is this. If you had an airplane, environmentally friendly, of course, that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
I this just popped into my head when you asked that question. And I have this just sounds straight. I would write loving it.
I don't think that's tried at all. I think, as I said, it's profound, it's succinct, and it's profound. And I actually took some time. I've this podcast is 700 episodes at this point, and I took some time and I took the first, I think, 300 responses or so to this question because I've been asking it for years, and I put them all in. They're very short, right? Because this is succinct, so the episodes are like 5 minutes long, and it's just each person's each person's answer to this question. And I got to tell you, love, kind, creative, compassion are the most the words that appear most often. So you are in good company, I would say, when with that answer. Tom, once again, I am incredibly grateful that you took the time to be here. I will put everything in the show notes so that people can find you and find Flags the Play, flagstheplay.com. Thank you again for being on the show.
Zolda, I'm really honored to have you allow me to do this. And I'm hooked on the show now. I started listening, when we first started communicating
Mm.
a month or so ago, and you're doing great work. I'm really um, feel fortunate that you took the time today to talk to me. Thank you.
Oh, you are so sweet. Thank you. That that now you're going to make me weep. I don't want to weep in the middle of an episode, but okay, drying my tears. If you're listening to this, you need to go find out about Tom Mullen and the work that he's doing in telling these incredible stories. And I love how he takes all of these different sources and puts them all together to tell a brand new spin on the human experience. So, Tom, thank you again for being on the show. I am Isolde Trachtenberg for the Creative Solutions Podcast. As always, reminding you to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the show if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2024. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope.